And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. An Egyptian court has sentenced 3 al-Jazeera journalists to between 7 and 10 years in prison. Peter Gresti, Mohammed Fahmy, and Bahar Mohammed were convicted on terrorism charges, including spreading false news in support of the Muslim Brotherhood, deemed by the government a terrorist group. The 3 have been jailed since December in a case that stoked international outrage. The hashtag Free Al Jazeera staff is trending worldwide. The sentence came down one day after U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry met with Egypt's new president, the Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Peter Gresti's brother, Mike Gresti, was in the Egyptian courtroom when the sentence came down.
Wrong verdict. It's, I don't know how the judge came to that decision. I'd be very interested to hear his reasons for giving that verdict. It doesn't make any sense.
Amnesty International decried the jail sentences, saying it was, quote, a dark day for media freedom in Egypt. The Australian Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, also condemned the sentencing.
Peter Gresti is a well-respected Australian journalist. He was in Egypt to report on the political situation. He was not there to support the Muslim Brotherhood. We respect the outcome of the recent elections in Egypt, and we will now initiate contact at the highest levels in the new Egyptian government to see whether we can gain some kind of intervention from the new government and find out whether intervention is indeed possible at this stage. I have spoken at length with Peter Gresti's parents. They are considering their legal options, including appeal options. We do not know how long an appeal process would take. But in the meantime, we will provide whatever consular assistance we can to Mr. Gresti and, of course, to his family. We understand that Egypt has been through some very difficult times, and there has been a great deal of turmoil in Egypt. But this kind of verdict does nothing to support Egypt's claim to be on a transition to democracy. And the Australian government urges the new government of Egypt to reflect on what message is being sent to the world about the situation in Egypt. Freedom and freedom of the press is fundamental to a democracy, and we are deeply concerned that this verdict is part of a broader attempt to muzzle the media freedom that upholds democracies around the world.
Australian Foreign Minister Julie Bishop condemning Egypt for sentencing 3 Al Jazeera journalists, Peter Gresti, Mohammed Fahmy, and Bahar Mohammed, to between 7 and 10 years in prison. We go directly to Cairo, Egypt now, where we're joined by Adel Fahmy. He's the brother of journalist Mohammed Fahmy, an Egyptian-Canadian journalist who was Al Jazeera's acting Cairo bureau chief at the time of his arrest. And we're joined by Democracy Now! Video stream by Democracy Now! Correspondent Sharif Abdel-Quddus, who is in the courtroom today as well. Adel Fahmy, can you respond to the verdict of the court?
Yeah, it was an absolute shock for all of us. We totally expected the opposite. Leading up to today, we had a lot of politicians gave us reason to be optimistic, or at least cautiously optimistic. And then to hear this was extremely traumatic to all of us. I can't even calm down. I'm still trying to calm down my parents. We have to start of the coming steps. But it's very sad that what the judicial system has given as a verdict. It's a disgrace, and it shows that the judicial system.
I think we just lost Adel. We will try to get him back. Sharif, you were there with the families, with the packed courtroom. Tell us what happened today.
Well, what this ruling means is that in Egypt, journalism is a crime. The court found these three journalists guilty, giving Mohammed Fahmy and Peter Greste 7 years in prison, and Beher Mohammed as well, and adding a 3-year prison sentence onto Beher Mohammed for possessing an empty shell casing of a bullet, which he said was a souvenir, and so he has 10 years in prison. It was a really difficult time in the court today when the verdicts were read out. The family members were weeping. Fellow colleagues, journalists, were weeping. Mohammed Fahmy was pulled away, had to be hauled away by the police in the court as he was trying to shout to journalists and respond to this outrageous verdict. Peter Greste said nothing. He simply held up a closed fist in the air, and Beher Mohammed was shaking his head. This is the little margin of freedom of expression and freedom of the press that has been continually shrinking in Egypt took a very heavy blow today. They are accused of, the prosecution has accused these three journalists of tarnishing Egypt's image abroad by portraying false scenes as Egypt undergoing a civil war to help a terrorist organization, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, which has been designated that. The prosecution throughout the trial did not show a shred of evidence of anything that comes close to that. Some of the evidence it showed even included stuff that had nothing to do at all with Egypt, including footage from Peter Greste in Somalia and Kenya, even shots of their parents and so forth. And so and essentially the court put journalism itself on trial. Many of the journalists today could have faced these same charges because they did nothing more than do their jobs. And Peter Greste himself was only in Egypt for a couple of weeks. And defense lawyers throughout the trial have asked the prosecution and the judge whether simply airing the views of an opposing voice is a crime in Egypt. And the sentence has put freedom of the press really a large step back in the country. And if you also, part of the prosecution's case rested on this technical report by 3 experts that went through all of the footage that was seized in the arrest of these 3 journalists. And during the trial, these expert witnesses denied they had any authority to judge whether these journalists endangered national security, and that contradicted the initial claims made to the prosecutor on which the entire case rests. So it's a very, very weak case. The Amnesty International Observer blasted this case and said it'll have a very negative effect on freedom of the press in Egypt.
This is Mohammed Fahmy from the cage in the courtroom condemning the proceedings.
Today's proceedings show that it seems like all the witnesses have some amnesia or something, Alzheimer's. There's a lot of discrepancies in the documents and what they are saying themselves. And the prosecutor has a lot to answer for allowing the 4 engineers in the Masviro State TV to have exactly the same copy-paste testimony that they have seen our video.
That's Mohammed Fahmy speaking from the cage. As the sentence was read, Mohammed Fahmy also yelled out, "Where's John Kerry?" Again, a reference to Secretary of State's surprise visit to Egypt just the day before, just this weekend. Adel Fahmy is back with us. The significance of Secretary of State Kerry talking about the renewal of all aid to military aid to Egypt, as your brother and the other journalists have been convicted and sentenced to 7 to 10 years in prison, Adel.
I think Egypt has to rethink how they're portraying themselves in front of the world. I think everyone is going to lobby. Different governments are going to lobby together against this appalling verdict. And the U.S. as well, I'm sure. I heard that Mr. Kerry discussed this trial with President Sisi yesterday, but I don't know how what resulted out of that. or if there was time for any corrective action to be taken. But now I think this case really requires strong diplomatic intervention by all governments and to make a firm stand against this ridiculous justice system.